What is up, investors? My name is Devin Moreno, and I'm a Baltimore investor. Here on this channel, we talk about all things relegated to Baltimore, yes, but honestly, most of the information we give, not all of it, can be applied to other cities and states in the entire nation. And with me today, I actually am doing a podcast here with Simi Vanderhoof, and prominent landlord here in Baltimore. Simi, how many properties are you managing actually?
So under management, currently we have just under 20, and then we also do a lot of tenant placements around the city, and as well as investing ourselves.
Hmm. All right. So as people know of me, I actually own 20 properties here in the Baltimore City, manage several others, but I've been kind of reducing it down to just rooming houses or co-living houses. We're going to talk about all of our experiences. We're going to talk about property management, our experience doing property management in Baltimore City, which more importantly is actually doing property management in a tenant friendly state. So the laws are heavily in favor of the tenant. In fact, this is one of the reasons that Baltimore City is very challenging for investors to invest in. And we're going to get into all the nitty gritty on why. Tenant placement strategies that we use to get tenants placed. And this includes Section 8. And we'll actually follow up a little bit with rooming houses as well, since I happen to be, very, skilled with that whole section. And then at the end of the podcast, we're going to devote the last 20 minutes of it to talk about Section 8 specifically, how to get some tenants from that program, get that rent in, because actually a lot of people see it as guaranteed rent, but it's actually what I like to call more likely than not rent. So definitely not guaranteed, but we're going to get into that toward the end of the show. So stay tuned for that. And so with that in mind, let's get into the property management portion of this. And before we begin, Simi, you said you manage how many properties again?
Just under 20. And in terms of my personal property management, I'm not entirely trying to grow a property management company to hundreds or thousands of doors. I use property management really to learn how to be a good landlord and to learn the city of Baltimore, how to manage tenants in Baltimore, how to and all of that kind of stuff. So I've been taking on I've been very selective with the clients that I take on in property management. As I like to tell a lot of the clients I take on, I'm looking for mentorship as much as business from them. And I've been blessed enough to get some really good clients that are mentoring me through it and teaching me how to manage properties, what to look for in properties, what to look for in tenants, and all of that kind of stuff, which has helped me in my own investing journey as well. So we're currently just under 20. We have 5 clients total. We really, like I said, aren't looking to take on too many more clients on the property management side of things. As anybody who manages properties, especially in Baltimore, knows, it's not the most financially lucrative business unless you have a lot of doors. And that's just not something that, I viewed as something I wanted to do outside of doing it for myself. So again, like I used it to really learn the city, learn the industry, learn how, the ins and outs of how to manage properties.
Actually, that's huge. What you just said, actually learning how to manage properties, that's actually exactly why I started property management. You said, so before we move on from that point, because actually it's really important to touch on that. You said you managed for very specific clients in order to
Correct.
learn. What type of clients are we talking about? What's the best type of client for a new investor wanting to learn how to do that?
Yeah. So ideally, it's somebody who's been investing for a little bit of time, maybe has a full-time job, so they can't, be in the city all the time. They need boots on the ground. They have anywhere from maybe 5 to 10, 15 properties. And they just don't have the time to be in the city every day, to have their hands on their project all the time, but they still want to be involved, at least to the extent where they're willing to teach you. So like I said, I was very blessed to find that. And I actually found my first couple of clients through tenant placements. And I know we're going to touch on that a little bit more, but we started my first, my first, experience in the industry was tenant placements. And I was able to find my first couple of clients through doing tenant placement. I did a good job for them. They were happy with the service, and they asked me if I could help them manage their properties. And the first couple of them, I kind of was hesitant. And I told them, I'm like, listen, I have zero experience in this. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to take on too much. I don't want you to trust me with something that I'm going to, make mistakes with. And that's actually how the idea of mentorship through property management and learning through property management came to me. Because the first one who was trying to get me to help them out, he told me, he said straight up, he said, listen, I know you're brand new at this. I was brand new at tenant placement when I first started doing that for him. He saw how hard I worked and how much I was willing to learn. And he said, I just don't have the time to really be doing it myself. But that doesn't mean I'm not willing to help you through it and teach you along the way. And when you have questions, come to me. And I was able to really lean on that and use his mentorship to be able to learn how to manage properties, and then got more comfortable enough to take on a couple of more clients. So my first client had 4 houses. He had a full-time job, like I said, out of DC. So he wasn't able to be in Baltimore all the time. He needed boots on the ground. And he viewed me as somebody who he thought would be able to pick it up quickly enough, or, at least efficiently enough to be able to take off the bulk of his responsibilities so he didn't have to be in Baltimore every night after work.
Mm. So this is actually an incredible strategy for new investors out there who want to learn the city. If you happen to have the time, now that's obviously the key point. Do you have the time to manage other people's properties? And you actually found them through tenant placement. So rather than, going around and begging, some senior landlord to, manage their properties for them for free education, which of course, why would they even trust you with that? You first showed your competency by offering to place tenants, which is because they're going to screen them anyway, right after you do anyway. They're going to screen them most of the time. I mean, if they trust you, they probably won't. But in the beginning, they might screen the tenant after you're done screening them, and they'll kind of get a level of your competency just in your ability to evaluate people, to run an operation. Because, obviously, if you're taking 3-4 months to do tenant placement, well, then what's the hope of, you to do it like management and whatnot. So actually, that's pretty good. And I think that it's such a low risk to them just to have you do it. Because here's the deal. The barrier for them is if you fail to place a tenant, then they just don't pay you anything. And you just did it all for free. So it's such an easy thing to start off at. So I actually think that's fantastic.
And just to kind of touch on that, really, what I tell people who want to get into investing in any market really is do something within the industry to learn the industry, whether that's, I know a lot of people hate on it, but whether that's wholesaling, whether that's tenant placement, whatever it is, do something where you can provide value with very little risk to the investor or to the property owner, where you're making pretty much commission. Our tenant placement, and obviously I don't want to get too deep into this because I know we're going to touch on this later, but we just charge 1 month's rent, and that's fairly standard for the industry. So like you said, it's no risk to them. If I don't place a tenant and I take 3 months or 2 months and don't do anything, all I did was waste my time. Obviously, their unit didn't get placed. But a lot of times, especially when you're new and the company is brand new, or you're individually brand new to doing this, a lot of times you're not the only one working on the property. So they're going to have multiple people placing that same unit for them. And if you just never place a unit for them, never get a tenant in there, all you did was waste your time. They're not paying you an hourly. They're not paying you a salary. It's very low risk to them. And you can show them that you're willing to work hard, that you're willing to learn, and that you're willing to, grow within the industry. And then as you, get more and more into that, you take on more and more responsibilities. And hopefully, as in what happened in my case, they actually came to me and asked me to take on more responsibilities, and they invited it and gave me more responsibilities.
All right. So I guess before we jump headlong into the tenant placement side, because it's tricky because, and we'll get into it, but if you don't screen correctly on tenant placement, Baltimore will punish you severely for messing that process up. And we're going to get into why. But, on the property management side, one thing I actually say to a lot of new investors is they probably should manage their first couple properties on their own. They actually should not hire a management company. And this is even coming from an ex-property manager. I don't know. I managed like 12 properties outside of my own. So it wasn't huge. But the thing is, like, with managing your own properties, you start to learn whether or not another property management company is actually managing it correctly. You start to learn kind of the ins and outs of the business. One issue I find, so you mentioned that you select your clients by, very specifically to advanced investors. Well, I actually do not like managing properties for new investors or homeowners, people who lived in a house and then just moved out of it and want to rent it. The reason why is because they have very, very unrealistic expectations of how this works. And that's always kind of weird because everyone has been a tenant before, so it's like, okay, well, I've seen it on the other end. So how could I not understand? But it is actually a very tricky business, especially with the psychology that you have to learn with the tenants and the, I don't know, the different ways to know when to fix something. Kind of, this is going to sound weird when not to fix something is kind of strange, but which I'm not saying, obviously not have a slumlord house. Anyone who's seen my houses on YouTube, they're all gorgeous, properties, very, very well maintained. But, so what's your opinion on that? Do you think new investors should at least manage a couple on their own, or do you think it's really not that big a deal? And it's probably better not to distract yourself with the day-to-day of property management and instead focus on your business. What do you think about that?
No, I agree with you there. I think it's very, very important for a new investor to manage their own properties for a couple of reasons. I think one, especially if you have a full-time job and you're just starting to get into investing, it'll help you kind of slow your way into it. You're not going to go out and buy 5 properties if you know you have to manage them all. You might buy 1 or 2 to start, and I think that that can save you a lot of headache and you help you learn along the way without biting off more than you can chew. And obviously, as well, as you said, it'll help you really learn the industry, learn how to manage tenants if this is your first time doing it, learn what to expect. And it can really help you not make as many mistakes, or when you do make the mistakes, you're learning from the mistakes. And then when you are ready to hire a property management company, you know what to expect from them. Property management companies, and again, this is going to sound weird coming from a property manager, but like I said earlier, it's very, very slim margins. It's very difficult to make money in property management, which really creates a little bit of a unique situation where the property manager, in a sense, is incentivized to screw the landlord, their clients, a little bit to be able to make more money. Yep. For instance, every maintenance request, every issue is more money for them. If the tenant leaves after the year, that's more money for them because they're going to place the tenant for you as well. So knowing what good property management is by learning that yourself will allow you to then, when you are ready, pick a good property management company to manage your properties for you. I think it's very important, and this goes to anything in investing. If you're doing, construction on your properties, it's good to understand the construction a little bit. If you're managing properties and you're a landlord, it's good to understand a little bit, at least the basic levels of property management, and have your hands on as much as you can. The investors who struggle the most, in my opinion, are the absentee investors, the investors who put the money down, purchase a property, and then expect to be able to hire people out to take care of everything else. That really sets yourself up to be screwed by other people. Unfortunately, the industry that we're in of real estate investing, there are some people who are looking to screw other people over, and there's a lot of money in the industry. And as we've talked about, off air plenty of times, if you're an investor, you're going to get screwed. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and it's a matter of trying to minimize that as much as you can. But it happens to everybody. It happens to the most seasoned investors, and it's just a matter of being as involved as you possibly can and understanding each aspect as much as you possibly can to minimize that as much as you can.
And that, actually mentioned 2 great points, that the upcharging on maintenance items and making sure your tenants continue to leave your property are beneficial for the property manager. And so what can end up happening, especially if you have a property manager who is an investor themselves, it can be very, very tempting to take a tenant who's applying for your property and steer them over to one of their own for the property management company. If the tenant is like a long-term, literally says out of their mouth, I just want to find somewhere to live for the next 10 years and, have it to be my dream home for the rest of my life. that kind of tenant is very tempting to just take from your property. And then a tenant who's like, hey, I'm just looking for a house, but I need a place to stay for a year. Well, that's the one you dump in all the houses that you manage for. And so, people might say, oh, well, that's messed up, but how would you ever know? Like it doesn't really happen. So you have to understand that the same with the maintenance items and being very clear on what you want fixed and whatnot, because to really fix anything, usually property managers will charge like, and this is a loose number, but like a 35% upcharge on the price to fix the whatever it was. And this is just for coordinating the call. You might be like, well, don't they get paid the property management fee for that? Well, the problem is, in Baltimore City, especially, and we're just going to really go with that. You have a house that's going to rent for what, $1,000, $1,500. Property manager makes 10% of that often. And so they will make $100 or $150 to manage your home. And if they have to deal with a tenant frequently, I mean, for that amount of money, if they spend longer than 4 hours ever even thinking about your property, then they are losing money.
and that's over the course of an entire month.
Yeah.
And you could theoretically have a month where the tenant never calls you, but you can also have a month or a tenant, specifically if it's not a great tenant, who's calling every day with another issue,
especially multi units.
Exactly. And if that happens to your property manager, they're going to be looking at their bottom line like, this property is bleeding me. And at any possible chance that they get to make a little bit more income on the property, they're going to take that chance.
Yeah.
And it can be as simple as somebody like calls them and tells them that their front doorknob is loose. They're going to have to send somebody out there, one of their guys, that they're paying whatever they're paying hourly to. And he's going to have to go with the screwdriver and screw that in. And you're going to be the one charged for that. Whereas if you're managing your own property, you might just hop in the car, go out there with a screwdriver and do it yourself, or tell the tenant, you know what, do you have a screwdriver? Do you mind screwing in this doorknob for us?
Yeah.
And most of the time, if you have a rational tenant, and this goes back to placing your tenants properly and picking good tenants, most of the time, a good tenant's probably not even going to call you about that. They're just going to screw it in. An okay tenant, if they do call you and you ask them to screw it in, will likely screw it in for you. In the worst case scenario, you hop in your car next time you can and you go down there and do it yourself. Whereas if you have a property management company doing it, especially if you're an investor who doesn't really know what you're doing, they're going to send one of their guys out there, and next thing you know, you have a $50 charge for screwing in a doorknob.
Yep. And the other thing about this, actually specific to Baltimore City, a lot of you new investors are going to come into this city. And, I mentioned earlier that you get about $1,000 in rent in some of these communities. That's really the market rent on a normal house. Right. So it just kind of depends on where you are, but mainly it's in those areas where like buying a house is like 50,000 or less. Right. And, that's where the vacants are. That's where some of the harsher areas are. And so a lot of investors come from other states hoping to get cheap properties. Well, the problem is another issue you may not realize you're going to run into is you're going to get a lot of property managers who are going to tell you they're not going to manage your house. You actually have no choice but to manage it yourself. And that's because, once again, if it's a percentage of your rent amount, then they either can manage it for $100, which is like nothing. It's not even worth the time to even consider thinking about, or even put it on your system, or they can up the charge on you, in which case you're not making any money. You as the investor. I mean, private management is essentially like bleeding money, trying to take water from a rock. Like it's pretty difficult process. And so when we get into it though, so you decide, okay, I'm going to listen to Devin and Simi, and you're going to manage this property yourself. And this is a subject that almost takes an entire, 1 hour podcast to talk about the different psychologies in it. So we probably can't go into too much in depth, but what I would do is and this is, you know what, Simi, tell me if you agree with me on this one, but this is having managed in a tenant friendly state. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you consider, but I think that a lot of new landlords are not prepared for how little power they have over their own property when dealing with their tenants. And this means that the relationship between you and your tenant is crucial.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It really is a little bit of It's a little bit of a shock to a lot of new investors. It was a shock to me the first time I had to deal with it. But really, you have almost no control over your house once you rent it out to somebody. And this goes back to really screening your tenants properly, picking the right tenants, and this goes for market tenants and Section 8 tenants.
Yeah.
There are a lot of landlords in the city that I've run across who will accept any Section 8 tenant, because they view Section 8, like you said in the beginning of the show, as guaranteed rent. And as we're going to get into later in the show, it's obviously far from it. But it really, again, goes back to screening your tenants properly, because they really can, they have all the power in the world. And they really can, in one way or another, quote unquote, steal your house from you if they decide to. And a lot of these tenants understand that. A lot of tenants know the game better than any investor does. And they know the system. They know Baltimore City. They've maybe even been through it multiple times. And this goes back into how Baltimore City really is a tenant-friendly state. A tenant could be evicted in a Baltimore City house, and you won't know it. It won't show up on any records. And you can
sue them in order to get it to show up.
Correct. Yeah. The landlord would have had to sue them for it to come up on any sort of case search, even whether you're doing a free Maryland case search or you're paying for the full evictions report. Baltimore City hides evictions. So you could do everything right. You could screen your tenant properly, and they could have possibly been evicted multiple times, and they know the game. They know the court systems. They know how to, skirt around it, and they can stay in your house for a long, long, long time. Thankfully, I haven't had too many of these issues in my own properties. I know you had
proper screening.
Right. Exactly. But I know plenty of investors in the area who deal with year-plus long eviction processes where you really can't do anything with your house for 12, 13, 14, 15 months. And not only are you not getting rent on your house, and you can't rent it out, your mortgage is obviously coming out monthly. But on top of that, you have no idea what the condition of the house is going to be like when you take that house back over. And it can go further than just the mortgage. If your tenant is paying the water bill and they stop paying the water bill, when they leave, that water bill is attached to the house in Baltimore City. So you as the landlord are going to have to pay their water bill plus the interest that it incurred over the time since they stopped paying it. Which is actually why a lot of me personally, I pay the water on my houses. I encourage all of my clients to pay the water on their houses. Anybody I talk to, it's not even worth the headache. You bulk it into your rent. As you do your rental analysis, you have that in mind. And you just pay the water from the get-go, and you won't have that issue. I know people who've gotten out of leases with tenants, and they have a $5,000-$6,000 water bill that they have to take care of before they can ever get another rental license or lead paint inspection or anything on the house. The tenants have a lot of power in Baltimore City, and like I said, they know the system.
Just to clear this up. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, as one of our mutual friends likes to say, it can be very beneficial for you as a new investor or somebody looking to get into investment in Baltimore to go down to the rent courts one day and just
stay there for a day.
Just stay there for a day and just watch the cases. It's very eye-opening, and you'll learn a lot about investing in Baltimore, and it's just something to be prepared for. And like we've been saying this entire time, it goes back to proper screening of your tenants, making sure you get good tenants in there that are going to stay for a while, that are going to pay their rent, that are going to take care of your property. That alleviates a lot of headaches and helps you make money as a landlord. Otherwise it can be very, very difficult, and you'll see yourself losing money.
And, just to go into some of the examples here, because here's the thing. It's very easy for especially tenants watching this to say, oh, well, God forbid that we have any laws to protect the tenants around here, which is honestly a very valid argument. Like, you can see a reverse case in landlord friendly states where it goes to the opposite extreme, where the landlord can just not fix anything and then just kick them out over anything. So tenants can't even have a bad day, So this is the opposite extreme. It's when it's being taken to the other end and it's being taken advantage of. Because, like, I'm going to give a bunch of examples where it would seem fairly unfair to a landlord, but this is how it works here. So without even getting into eviction process, which I've covered in videos, and how you think it's going to take 3 months. It's not. It's going to take 6 months to a year to get your tenant out. And if the tenant really knows what they're doing, then it can hold it hostage for even longer than that, without a problem. So basically, one thing Simi mentioned, the water bills. Yeah, if they don't pay it, that's on you. You got to pay that, and you can sue for it. But if your tenant can't afford it, then it doesn't matter. And so, like, also, if the tenant just throws their trash out in the yard, the city's coming after you for that. And I mean, other people can throw the trash in your yard. That happens on a lot of end units in Baltimore City, and it's on you. You get the fines. And by the way, they send the fines often to the property, so sometimes you may not even know about them. But you're going to get those. The tenant's not going to pay for that. And as we'll get into some of the fines you'll pay in Section 8 as well, there's a lot of things where Section 8 tenants can break stuff and you have to pay for it. You have to fix it. Same with escrow. This actually works in escrow cases where if a tenant breaks something, you have to fix it. Even if they broke it, even if they intentionally broke it, you will have to fix it. Otherwise, the rent can be withheld. And so it's almost to an extreme degree where you're going to notice your lease. You're going to think to yourself, okay, well, I'll put all this in the lease, but to be honest, what I often tell the new investors is that your lease is fairly meaningless. Your lease is really more designed to protect them from you rather than the other way around. So, which is why, and this is, I guess, the last thing we'll touch on before we get into some screening tips, some tactics to avoid these situations. But this is why often so Simi, actually wants your opinion on this. There's a lot of investors who have the opinion that they prefer month-to-month leases versus year-long leases in Baltimore City, mainly because now at least you have two avenues to get them out if you don't want them in your house. What's your thought process on that?
Yeah, so I generally don't love month-to-month leases. I have seen them work before, and a lot of times people will actually stay a little bit longer on a month-to-month lease because they view it as, oh, I can get out at any time, and it's only a month. So especially where I like month-to-month leases most is after the first year of the lease, your lease converts to a month-to-month. So rather than forcing the tenant to decide, do I want to stay here for a whole nother year? Your tenant only has to decide, do I want to stay here for another month? And then another month after that, and another month after that. And in my experience, a lot of times they'll stay for over the course of the next year, because they view it as very flexible. I don't love month-to-month leases to start out because you really open yourself up to having a turn very, very quickly. Having to turn a property even after 1 year can really take a lot of your profits. Having to turn a property after 4 or 5 months can be, very detrimental. So I don't personally love that. I have seen some landlords use that when the tenant, it might be considered a little bit more riskier. So they'll go to a 6-month lease or a month-to-month lease just in case they stop paying their rent or whatever it might be. You have another avenue of getting your property back versus just going through the court systems and the eviction process. So it can work to your advantage. I personally don't love it because I generally view it as something that you'll probably be seeing an early turn on. And I would just rather wait the extra month or two until I find a really quality tenant. And that's another thing. I know we're about to get into the screening process and some tips there. I really would rather hold my house vacant for 2 months longer and find the best tenant I possibly can than fill it as quickly as possible and end up putting in not the best tenant possible. I found that you end up making a lot more money in the long run and having a much easier time managing that property by putting in the right tenant, even if it takes you a couple months of holding a vacant property. It can alleviate a lot of headaches and just creates an easier, overall experience. And again, it goes at the end of the day, if you have a tenant who stays there for 5 years and you held it vacant 2 months longer to find them, you're not doing any turns for those 5 years. You're just collecting rent and fixing any minor issues, hopefully that pop up. And if you have a good tenant and they take care of the house, and you put together a good house and you don't have leaky pipes and a water heater that's going to burst and things like that, you really shouldn't have too many expenses over that time period where you're really able to cash flow on the house.
So let's go ahead and talk about some tactics on tenant placement. I'd like to do so in the sense of going one by one and talking about a situation a tenant presents to you. And you tell me if that's a a yellow flag for you or not, or how you're going to view that. So this is actually real important to note that once again, we are talking about a tenant friendly city. So a lot of the Baltimore City has in these tenant friendly states, in any tenant friendly city, you have what we call professional tenants, whom might actually seem like interesting superheroes to a lot of tenants were misinformed about how this works, but like essentially they take advantage of landlords by trying to pretend to be a good tenant, but just with situations. And these situations will look like the same thing that a perfectly good tenant has. And if you let them in, they're going to hold your house hostage for years. Now, the problem is this creates some interesting situations where we actually have to regard normal scenarios as yellow flags. Now, some of these I've said on my channel, and people have had certain debates about it. So, Simi, I'm going to wonder what your thoughts on it. All right. So this is the first time we're talking about this. It's my regulation anyway. So let's go for it. Tenant tells you they need to move in ASAP. How do you feel about that?
So generally, I'm going to go a little bit deeper. That's a red flag to me. If a tenant tells you they need to move in ASAP, in my opinion, one of a couple of things is happening. Either they're getting denied left and right, and that goes into maybe another, red, yellow flag situation you're going to bring up. But if they're telling, like, if they're, really worried about the application fee, or they're getting denied left and right, there's probably a reason for that. And the other potential reason could be that they're getting evicted from their property, and they need a place because they're losing their current house. And again, that's not going to show up on any public records. They haven't been sued yet, and any failure to pay rent or notice of intent is not going to show up on any records. So you really can't see that by your regular screening. And this goes back to judgment of character and when you're doing the showings. And this is why I still do a lot of my own showings. And my agents that I have on my team, I train them in this and looking for different things, like you said, that might seem normal to, I guess, quote unquote, the naked eye, but could be a potential yellow or red flag. If they generally a good tenant that has good landlord references, has lived in good houses, and pays their rent on time, takes care of things, is a responsible person, is generally going to start looking for their new house probably 6 weeks before they need to move. And there really shouldn't be a reason that they're down to the final week and haven't found something. I guess that could be another reason. They're just not a responsible person.
Let me actually give you some reasons here, just to interrupt you, because I've seen this in the comments. What I've mentioned this as a red flag, because a lot of tenants who have had a situation where they need to move ASAP don't understand that because they're in Baltimore City, we have to take this seriously. So, what if they're in a domestic violence situation and they're getting out of it? What if they're, being, I don't know, kicked out of their family's house, maybe for a reason that's completely related to them? I've seen that kind of comment. There are reasons. Okay. And me and Simi both acknowledge there are reasons that you would have to move out ASAP, that there's a situation beyond your control. The problem is the professional tenants, right? So if we're go ahead and guess on this, because once again, Simi already told you, Baltimore hides the evictions. Baltimore hides the evidence that we would need to look for. So since they hide it, we can either take the chance and rent to you, or we just say no and we move to the next person who's a safer bet, because we don't know. We have no idea. And the punishment for us being wrong is very severe, very high. So keep that in mind when you look at these professional tenant reasons. They will look normal.
Right. And just to kind of touch on that a little bit, obviously, like you said, it's a little bit of a roll of the dice. But that also comes down to judgment of character. And if it truly is somebody, and this is where you have to sometimes use your best judgment, and sometimes the risk might be worth taking. And if it, if it really does kind of check out in your mind, and it's a situation where it's very plausible that it's a single mom with their young child, and it's very possible that they did just come out of a domestic violence situation, and that may be accurate. It's something you have to consider, obviously, and it's something that I would obviously love to help somebody coming out of that situation find their next home and get into a safe home for them and their children. It's just something you have to consider all of the different risk factors and look at their full tenant report, as I like to call it, and maybe talk to their previous landlords. If I call their landlord and he tells me, yeah, she's been living here with her boyfriend for this and this amount of time, she called me and said she's trying to get out for domestic violence, that things start to check out, and call maybe a second landlord back, and she was a great tenant there. It's about trying to see the full picture. But like you said, if you roll those dice and you're wrong, you might have a tenant in there for the next 6 months to a year not paying rent or not taking care of your property, and it's a risk you have to be willing to take if you're going to go that route.
All right. So let me fire a couple other ones here at you just to see kind of your general thought on it. So some other ones I've kind of seen that once again, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you look at this a different way, but so if we have a tenant who wants to pay you in cash, he's got 3 months of rent right now. He's ready to move in, but he's willing to pay you. What's your thought on that when they're offering you just a lot of money?
Sure. Yeah, that would also, raise my radar a little bit. I've never accepted more than 1 month's rent. And sometimes I'll obviously, your security deposit. Sometimes I will do a double security deposit if I want to approve them and they're a little bit more higher on the risk factor. And that'll do a couple of things. As if I structure it as first month's, last month's, and security deposit, it'll guarantee me an extra month's of rent if something does go wrong. And B, it also shows me that they have that money in savings if they're able to come up with 2 months rent or two times deposit plus the first month's rent. So it shows me that they have a little bit of, a cushion in life, and that they're responsible enough to have that money saved up, or, at least be able to come up with that money. But in general, to get back to your question, somebody who shows up with 3, 4, 5 months in cash ready to go, there's, again, generally a reason for that. And at a lot of times from, people who I've spoken to in real estate who have done that, as soon as that 5, 6 months are done, you don't see another cent in rent. So yeah, they might have that 6 months right now, but if they're trying to pay you 6 months up front, that means they've probably been getting denied on regular applications, because who in their right mind would want to give you 6 months upfront of rent if they could easily pay that month to month? There's generally these type of things, while they may look very, normal on the surface, there's generally a reason. If somebody's coming to you before you even screen them and telling you, yeah, I'll pay you 3 months up front. If you come back to somebody with a denial, for instance, you send them we personally send denial letters, and they call you up like, why was I denied, blah blah blah. You send them their report, you explain to them why they were denied, and then they say, I could pay 3 months up front if that helps. That would be a little bit different to me. But if somebody immediately off the bat comes up and says, I have 6 months up front for you, or I have 3 months up front for you, that would, raise my radar. That would be what I guess we would consider a yellow flag.
And, that's actually good, important points, because now, once again, we note some exceptions to that. There's also some where I've seen, if you're around April, oftentimes people's tax returns is what's giving them such a large amount of money all randomly at once. And it can be a factor. Once again, tenant placement is you take a whole collection of the individual, but it's just a factor to consider. Also note that the first month and last month's rent, in my opinion, is a fallacy. It's really first and second month's rent, because if the tenant doesn't pay the second month, then you are forced to use the last month for the second month. And lawyers have told me that. And so I was like,
an important distinction there as well, as to why I structured as first month's, last month, and security rather than first month's and 2 times security. In the state of Maryland, you are allowed to accept up to 2 times security deposit of 1 month's rent, but your security deposit, until the tenant is out of there, cannot be used as rent. So if you accept 2 times deposit, until you actually get them out of there, you can't use that part of any of that deposit. That deposit has to be put into an escrow account. So you cannot use that deposit as rent. But if you have first month's, last month's rent and security deposit, you can use that last month's rent as a rental for any missed months that they might have.
So I guess just throwing out some other ones here. How do you feel about extremely large education debt?
Sure. So that one to me, actually, I have no problem with. Personally, when I'm running my screening, two things that I don't really factor in are medical debt and student debt. In America, generally, a large portion of the population will have a decent amount of either medical or student debt. And the way that I look at it from my experience, is generally those things will wait over rent. If somebody, for instance, has, maybe a repossession in their past or owes a lot on credit cards and is paying monthly installment on credit cards, those are things I factor in a lot more. But to me, medical and student debt, I really generally don't look at all.
So actually, I'm in a similar camp with that. A lot of times, those two types of debt are often more easily accrued and harder to get rid of. And a lot of times, medical debt is being disputed. So it's through a process that takes forever for insurance to pay for it. And so that's understood. Education's an interesting one, though, because I'll give you one caveat to that. Now, professional tenants aren't usually getting large education loans. So this is really nothing to do with them. But if a student has education debt and it's in forbearance, a lot of times I'll ask them, when does that end? When do your payments for your education loan start up? And I've had it happen several times where they'll say, oh, like, we're in, July, and they're like, oh, November, especially after COVID when a lot of it got postponed. And I'll say, okay, what are your payments for November? And she's like, or they, whatever, $500. So I say, okay, so if you were to increase the rent by $500, do you feel you still could afford it? And sometimes you'll notice that they didn't really think that far ahead. They're kind of like, oh yeah. And
Right.
so that is something I do try to take into account, like just making sure to protect yourself from a future situation you're not accounting for.
Right. And that is a very good point. And again, I guess if, somebody in that situation had really good credit, that would be something that would obviously concern you a little bit more because they're not going to want to miss payments and hurt their credit. And then you might get to the point where they're paying partial rent and kind of getting on a payment plan with you and trying to work out, how they're going to pay rent. But a lot of times I've noticed, at least in my experience and with the houses I'm doing, generally students don't have the best credit to begin with. And a lot of times what I've noticed is that they'll push off their student loan payment instead of missing rent, because missing rent is carries obviously the ability that they and the threat that they maybe lose their house. Whereas missing a student loan payment, all it does is affect their credit. And a lot of times if their credit is already not great, they won't view that as such a negative.
All right. I'll throw one last one at you here, just curious your thoughts. So this one obviously not a professional tenant, but how do you feel about someone who's 18 and just first house?
Yeah, that's a really tough one because everybody's been in that situation. You and I have been in that situation where you're looking to rent your first property and everybody's telling you no because you don't have any rental history. So a lot of times I personally don't have too much of an issue with that if their income is significant enough to make the rent. The biggest factor there is that you're going to have to be worried about, are they responsible to save their money and have that $1,200 every month? So a lot of times I'll see if a parent can co-sign for them on that in that situation.
A lot of times I've found in Baltimore City, at least from my experience, it's a little tougher to get the parents to co-sign because often the parents are not in the financials, which means they often can't afford to co-sign. Now, when we're in regards to students like Johns Hopkins students, well, then it's not really a problem.
Right.
But
and honestly, with students, a little bit, I really don't have that concern at all because a lot of times their student
parents will
loans,
co-sign.
their parents will co-sign, and their student loans will also cover housing in many cases. So they're actually getting that covered. Specifically when you talk about Johns Hopkins University and that sort of situation. I actually rent to a few students who their student loans actually cover housing. So when they took out their student loan, they took a part of that is taken out to cover housing for those number of years that they're going to be in school. So it's a I view it a little bit as more guaranteed. And like you said, a lot of times those students also do have parents who are willing to co-sign and will be able to financially co-sign.
See, and the thing though is we have to acknowledge the demographics of Baltimore City. It's a huge renter city. I mean, there's very
Right.
few homeowners in comparison to the renters, which is what makes it such a strong renter market from a statistics point of view. I mean, we're mentioning the laws aside, but you are going to get a lot of 18-year-olds whom parents cannot co-sign. They're not students. This is just their first place and they're just needing to leave their parents' house. This creates a very difficult situation where you're going to have to really get in deep with this person because most likely their parents or maybe the society they're in or whatnot, it's questionable whether or not they have all the financial skills to know how to manage for, a house. And so a lot of times for them, you do need to be very particularly careful. Sometimes they'll move in with their friends or a significant other who's also young. And you have to account for they have to make it that whole year and continue to like each other by the end of that.
Yeah.
So,
And
because
sorry to cut you off there,
oh, no,
but
go ahead.
just to touch on that a little bit, a lot of times that actually scares me more than if they're able to financially live by themselves, because a lot of times when somebody is living in a house for the first time, they really don't necessarily know how to live with other people outside of their family.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, even if it's a best friend, a lot of times in my experience, at one point or another, they're going to get into a big fight and one of them is going to want to leave. And then the other one can't cover rent by themselves, even if that other person does leave. And then you're in a whole sticky situation where that tenant now can only afford half rent and is looking for a new roommate. And that can, although your lease obviously, if it's set up properly, does state that each tenant is solely responsible for the rent, even if one doesn't pay. It doesn't matter if they don't have the money. If they don't have the money, your lease can say anything.
Yeah.
And it's a bit irrelevant. So I would honestly, in those situations, do prefer to have the individual tenant who's brand new to renting come into the house by themselves, as long as obviously they can financially afford it.
And keep in mind, like, this is being said by a person who literally went through this situation as a tenant. Like, my very first house when I was 18 years old, I rented it with my best friend. He abandoned me month 2 and gave whatever reason he wanted to give, but he abandoned me month 2. And I actually had to tell my landlord, and I still remember the guy to this day. I said, hey, I didn't really, as an 18-year-old kid, I'm not thinking of the options here that I have available to me to work this out. But I just told him, I'm like, I think you're just gonna have to evict me because I can't really afford this. And he's like, well, let's work out a plan and whatnot. And he worked it out, and I actually ended up getting that rent caught up and paid back through an army bonus. But yeah, no, I mean, even as a person who went through that situation and had the difficulty of finding his first place to rent because everyone was rejecting me, unfortunately, there's a very good reason. And that's the tough part about this. So normally I'd say usually about the sweet spot is when you start turning around 22, a lot of these landlords will start to ease up, because the thing is, you have to understand that once again, the landlords in this position in Baltimore City, that if they accept you in the house, if you can't afford the rent there, then you can't go anywhere else either. So then it comes down to, we have to evict you. And remember, I just mentioned the eviction process takes, I mean, idealistically three months, but it can take an extremely long time if cancellations happen for any reason, which there are hundreds of reasons, which we'll go into in another podcast. But that's, that's something that has to be understood by that 18-year-old watching this video. Hear me now say, like, well, you're not even giving us a chance. Well, it's because of Baltimore. It doesn't really give us the wiggle room to give you that opportunity. And that's a weird kind of side effect of tenant-friendly laws. And so now there's lots and lots more screening examples that we can go into, little gotchas and stuff, but we'll probably dedicate a whole podcast to that. So if anyone wants us to talk about an entire podcast, if you're on YouTube, comment in the comment section below, let us know. Do you want us to have a whole video on just screening? Because there's a lot of stuff you may not be considering. And but we're going to try to get this final topic here before our hour is up. So let's talk about Section 8, Simi. Let's talk about the process with that, because a lot of landlords are like, you know what? the gold mine is in Section 8 in Baltimore City. And you know what? I'm inclined to agree. A lot of people know I do the rooming house strategy. I do not really, not that I like, I just don't do housing that's catered to a Section 8 like family.
Sure.
So, but many people make a lot of money on Section 8 here in this city. And there's a ton of Section 8. In fact, are you aware of even how many there are? Do you know the stats on
So
that?
I actually don't know the total number of Section 8 vouchers held in the city, but
Mhm.
I do know that last year they did over 14,000 initial inspections. So 14,000 people moved into their new Section 8 house in Baltimore City, over 14,000. And that could be somebody who was already on a voucher finding a new house. That could also be somebody brand new to the program. And then you obviously have the people that are a part of the program who stay in their house for 5 to 10, 15 years that aren't a part of that statistic. So I would imagine it's well over 20, 30,000.
And so we have that. And we have that combined with all the other voucher programs. See, a lot of people think Section 8, but they don't realize there's dozens of other voucher programs. Name a couple off to us. Like, do you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's obviously when we say Section 8, we're talking about the Housing Authority of Baltimore City or Baltimore County or wherever your house may be. There's also BRHP, Baltimore Rapid Housing Program, which is probably the second biggest voucher program in the city. Very similar to Section 8. And then you have other ones that are more so a little bit different, like you have Helping Homeless, specifically helping people who are formerly homeless try to find their first house. And that program actually is a little bit different, the way I understand it. I've personally never worked with them, so I apologize if any of this is inaccurate. But the way I understand that is that they actually help these individuals find jobs and then eventually get off of the program, which is a little bit different than the way Section 8 or BRHP or their mayor's office or some of these other programs might work.
And so there's all those other ones. So if you contact people like tenant placement experts like Simi, which we'll put in the YouTube channel in the description below, his contact information, so that you can reach out to him and hire him to put these vouchered tenants in your house. But there's a lot of different options out there. And so we're going to talk about Section 8 kind of more specifically. That's the most common one. Simi has the most experience with it. Technically, that's the most experience I have. You know, I only have 2 tenants on Section 8. So going with Section 8, one of the reasons, so I said it was a gold mine. It's really because, there's so many of them. It's a massive renters population, and Section 8 tenants historically within Baltimore seem to be on it for a very long time. And, I have my theories on that. I don't think the program is very well set up to incentivize people getting off the program. In fact, from my understanding of what my tenants tell me, my Section 8 tenants, that they're actually disincentivized to ever get off of the program and actually incentivized to stay on it for life. Mainly, if they reach a certain income threshold, then they lose the voucher, which then makes them broke again. So, so that being said, you often get Section 8 tenants on there in your house for the rest of their lives. They never get off the program. It's kind of this guaranteed rent. We'll go into why it's not necessarily guaranteed. But I mean, Simi, I know you probably haven't been doing this for 30 years right now, obviously,
Sure.
but I mean, is that the experience you've heard?
Yeah, most definitely. And if you're a good landlord, because that's the key. A lot of these people end up getting, pulled around and really screwed over by their landlords who view them as, guaranteed rent. They don't have to pay attention to the property. The rent just comes in. So if you're that type of landlord, you can expect your tenant to leave every year. But if you're a good landlord, you take care of the property, you take care of the tenant. If your understanding of them, for instance, if they're have to be a couple of weeks late on their portion of rent, because I'm sure we'll get into this later, but Section 8 tenants do have a portion of rent that they pay as well on top of what the housing authority or whichever program you're on pays for them. If you're understanding of them, you take care of them as a tenant, you take care of the house, they will stay forever. It's not an easy process to find a new house on Section 8. As much as it might seem like it is, there are much more vouchers than there are houses available. Everybody's looking for houses. It's very difficult to find a house in a good area that you're comfortable with, in a house that's taken care of with a good landlord. And when they find that, they stay there. I have clients who have tenants within their house for over a decade. and they're happy with it. And if their voucher decreases or increases, and we can go over why that might happen later, they'll even move to another one of that landlord's house because they're so happy with that landlord. So, and again, going back into what we talked about at the beginning of this podcast, the best way to increase your profits and to make as much money as you can off of your investment is to keep a tenant there as long as possible. The turns are what kill you. And if you have a good tenant and you're able to keep them there for a long time, that's obviously the best case scenario. And that is why a lot of people do like Section 8 in the house, or Section 8 tenants in their houses, on top of obviously a portion of the rent being pretty much guaranteed.
Yeah. And so let's talk about some of the little weird pitfalls some of the new investors run into with Section 8. Number one, and this is just when you initially apply with a Section 8 tenant. This is like before they've even gotten into the house. We're going to talk about some of the number one. This is a small point. Maybe we can elaborate on some more, but like water. Okay. It's very common for the Section 8 tenant to not really budget for water. And you're going to put on there on this application, to Section 8 stating, oh, well, landlord's not going to take care of any water, not going to do any of that. That is a mistake. Let them deal with the electric. That's fine. Yeah. But as Simi mentioned earlier, the water bill is attached to the property, and the tenants know that. And the tenants know that if they don't pay for it, you will. And remember, the only way to get that money back is in a civil suit. And what are the odds of you winning a civil suit against someone on a Section 8 voucher?
And even if you do win, good luck collecting on that, because you might think, okay, I'll garnish their wages. But if their wages are minimal enough that they're on a Section 8 voucher and they likely have kids as well, good luck getting a judge to allow you to garnish those wages in Baltimore City specifically. It's not going to happen. And do you really want to be that guy doing that, on top of the fact that it's highly unlikely to happen? Do you really want to be garnishing the wages of a single mom with a couple of kids living on pennies? I don't want to be that kind of guy. I would much rather pay the water bill, put it on the form, the RFTA, the request for tenancy approval. Section 8 will pay you a little bit of that as a part of their rent offer.
Boom, it's not that's huge right there. The
correct.
Section 8, they'll pay more if you pay for the water.
They will give you increase on the rent offer. Yeah. It likely, in my opinion, some people view it a little bit differently. And I have friends in the industry that pay electricity, pay everything because they think Section 8 pays enough for that. I'm personally not of that mindset. In my experience, they don't pay enough of an increase that it is beneficial to pay all of that stuff. But they will give you an increase. You'll see a little bit of that come back on your monthly rent, and you're still gonna be cash flowing on the property if you do the deal properly and you run your numbers properly. You get into a good deal. Whatever it is a month, $30-$40 a month is not going to kill you. And you're not going to be stuck with a $5,000 water bill when the tenant moves out. That will kill you. So it really is, in my opinion, one of the biggest mistakes that new investors make in Baltimore City is not paying the water bill on their properties. And that goes for both Section 8 and market tenants. All of the houses that we do, we pay water on, and we have no problem doing that. We calculate that in when we're making the initial purchase. When you're looking at a deal and when you're looking at rental analysis, water is always calculated into that.
And so let's go over some of the other ways we can increase rents, because once again, we're before the inspections here. Okay. So we're on renovations. All right. So before inspections. So we'll get into how that also impacts there, but increasing the rent a little bit. I've heard a couple things. Ceiling fans, install them. Yep. So literally you just put ceiling fans in your property. Boom. Now you get more rent.
Yes. So ceiling fans are definitely a big plus. And Section 8 inspectors really, really like that, especially if your house does not have central AC. Yeah. If your house does not have central AC, I would obviously advise getting your tenants window units, because you don't want to be that guy who doesn't. And you don't want to be that landlord. They will not stay for a long time. Get them window units if you don't have central AC. But on top of that, put ceiling fans in. Section 8 really likes that. They would put that almost on par with central AC. So if you're getting a house that might not be a full gut job, and it does not have central AC in it, and you don't want to pay $10,000 to put central AC in that, put ceiling fans in the rooms, give them window units, and Section 8 will view it almost on par.
All right. So stainless steel appliances versus white. Any
Um,
impact there?
I I honestly don't see too much of an impact there. Some people disagree with me there. I've had clients fight with me on that, where I tell them they don't need to. I personally don't use stainless steel. I don't think it's necessary. If I see a good deal on stainless steel appliances, I will get them if it and put them in my properties. I have nothing against it, but I've noticed that Section 8 doesn't pay you enough to justify it on top of white or black, and B, tenants generally don't care. That's not the big thing for them. The big thing they want to see on the tenant side of things is they want to see granite countertops or quartz. They want to see a nice bathroom. They want to see a bathtub. A lot of these houses don't have bathtubs. They have just standing showers. So we put bathtubs in all of our houses. Those are the things that really tenants have expressed to me are big things to them. So we'll do that, and maybe with the money that we save on stainless steel.
All right. So that's actually huge. I was going to go into the bathroom and the bathtubs,
Yeah.
so carpet versus vinyl. Any increase there?
I That's honestly a good question. I don't know. We
We just
generally
do vinyl and everything.
Yeah. I do have clients who do carpet upstairs for the bedrooms. I personally don't love that because you're gonna have to be changing it constantly.
Yeah.
But I'm honestly not too sure if I think Section 8 really gives you any upgraded value on that. I would venture to say I don't think there's that much of a difference.
Okay. All right. So then, all right. So these are little ways to increase the vouchers, how much money they actually offer. And of course, bedroom count is always key. Just make sure your bedrooms all have egress and 7 feet ceilings or higher. 6 feet 11 inches will not pass. And so basically, going through inspections, we'll just touch on this very fast. But if you fail your first inspection,
Which you will.
you will. That's actually what I was going to say. You mentioned there was 14,000 new applications.
Correct.
How many of
And
them actually passed the first inspection?
under 100? So you do the math there. There were over 14,000 initial inspections. Less than 100 of them passed on the initial. And in fact, Section 8 does not charge you for the second inspection because they are factoring in the fact that they're going to fail you on the first one. There will be a $75 plus $5 fee, so $80 reinspection fee if you need to get past the second into a third inspection. You're doing something wrong if you get a third inspection, though.
Yeah.
You should always pass on the second inspection. You take care of their punch list that they give you. They give you an outlined punch list of exactly what needs to be done off of their initial inspection. I personally like to at least show up myself or have one of my agents show up to the inspection. A lot of times that'll help us. I can get directly from the inspector what's wrong rather than looking on my portal at my Section 8 portal and trying to decipher what they're saying. So we always show up to our inspections. I think that's very big. And they will tell you exactly what they're marking as you're doing it. They won't give you, this is important though. If you are going to show up to the inspection, take notes, write down everything that they write down, because they will not give you the report after they leave. They will not allow you to take a picture of it. They will say it'll be in your portal tonight. Yeah. So as they're walking through, they will talk to you though, and they will tell you what they're writing down, and they will tell you that this needs to be fixed or that needs to be fixed, but take notes yourself because you will not get their notes.
So what I often do is I'll take pictures of whatever they referred to with my hand in the photo pointing at it.
Yeah, exactly.
So it is kind of ridiculous, some of the little arbitrary rules, which a whole video on that, but
yes, we could definitely do an hour long on just Section 8 inspections.
Which, once again, in the comment section below, let us know. Do you want us to go into a full video of Section 8? We can go through that. And actually, we have a lot of Section 8 experts who've been doing this for years. So, so now touching on that, as far as Section 8, obviously their ability to afford the property now is a little bit less of a question here. So what are some of the screening tips we're looking for with them specifically? I mean, if income's not factored, do we just accept anyone in there?
Yeah, no, that's actually a really good question. And I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people in Baltimore City will actually just accept any Section 8 tenant because they view the rent as quote unquote guaranteed. I'm personally not of that mindset. I screen them just like I would any other tenant. The only thing that I'm paying less attention to is their income and their credit. Although I do want to see some level of income, because again, they're going to have to still support their family. We require them to pay gas and electric. We also require them to have renter's insurance throughout their entire term. So if they're not able to do that and they're not able to cover the portion, we're still going to have issues there. So I do want to see some level of income on top of, maybe like $500 of Social Security. That would be a red flag to me if there's no income and there's no good reason. I do have a tenant who's a caretaker for one of their children, and they make a significant amount. I won't say how much, but they do make a significant amount of Social Security benefits. And we approved them because that was obviously a good reason for them not working. Yeah. But if there is no good reason, I want to see some level of income. But obviously I don't pay as much attention to that as I do a market tenant, and I don't look as closely on their credit, but I still do run their credit. I want to make sure they're not, they don't owe collections to every company under the sun. Like, I don't want to see, I specifically don't want to see BG&E. I don't want to see cell phone bills and collections. I don't want to see what we
cell
consider.
phone bills are huge. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. And those are things that I consider what I would call rental style, bills, like your car payment, your cell phone bill, cable and internet, BG&E, things like that, as a good indicator. And this goes to market tenants or Section 8 tenants. Those are good indicators that they struggle with their bills. Whereas, as we mentioned earlier, medical, student, things like that, I really don't care about too much. So again, I'm not concerned if they have even a 450 credit score. I don't care about that. What I care about is, what are those bills on? Do they have collections? What are in collections? Have they had repossessions in their history? Things like that. And obviously, have they been evicted? I'm going to call their landlord, and I'm going to call 2 landlords back on top of that. I want to get a good picture of how they live, and things like that. There are some people out here that I've heard will even make house visits and look at how they're living in their current house. That's not something I personally do. It's just not something I'm comfortable with, but it is another step that you can take to see, how is this person going to treat my property? There's a number of factors that go into approving a Section 8 tenant, even though the rent is more guaranteed. They still will have their portion, and they still do need to take care of their house. If they leave your house a disaster, all that Section 8 rent that you made over the last year goes right down the toilet. So you want somebody who's going to be taking care of your house. You don't want somebody who's going to be calling you every day with an issue or breaking the house and then requiring you to fix it, because Section 8 will withhold rents. If your tenant throws a rock through the window and you tell them
you have to fix it,
you have to fix it. You can tell them all day long that they're required to pay for it, but they don't have to. And Section 8 will withhold rent until that window is fixed.
And Baltimore City will not let you use that as a reason to evict or anything like that.
Correct.
So,
correct.
And so this goes into the level of power that tenants have. And so just understand that, like, when you put a Section 8 tenant in your house, they're actually quite a bit more powerful than you. And so in the fact that, you have to keep the house in a perfect condition. I actually remember one of the reasons I don't know, this is just a tortured moment for me, so I'll just go into it. But like, my tenant, my Section 8 tenant they had to clean their basement. They wouldn't clean their basement before the inspection. And if they didn't clean their basement, because the inspector told them that's their portion, they have to clean their basement, right? They didn't clean it, so they were going to lose their voucher. Now, here's the problem, though. And this is where, for all of you who have stayed to this point, you have now learned the mystery of why it's not guaranteed. If they lose their voucher for any reason, Section 8 stops paying for it, even for them not doing their part. Section 8 stops paying for it, and now they're your problem.
And they're still in your house.
They're still in your house. And so, you know what I did, Simi, to this situation? I brought me and my contractor, and we cleaned my tenant's basement.
Right.
So they would stay on the damn voucher.
And the tricky part about that is now they've come to expect that, and they know that that's what's going to happen. So the next annual inspection that comes around,
I already know. Yep.
Exactly.
They're
And
gonna make me clean the damn basement again. And this is where I think that was the moment where I just was like, that's no longer my business model. It's emotional. It definitely is an emotional reaction to the situation because let's be real. If you're making plenty of money on Section 8, then I guess it is what it is. Maybe every inspection, you just know that they're going to have that problem. Maybe you could possibly kick them out, get a better tenant in there, but just know that times everything else, like stuff in the yard. Like I had mentioned, my tenant kept putting trash in the yard, but they would put it on the grass. So of course rats got into it, tore up the bag and shoved all the trash all over the yard. Section 8 and I got fined both ways. Section 8 and also the city inspectors come by and they're like, hey, you have trash all over your yard. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. So now we just do that. She wouldn't cut the grass. So I had to send a grass mower over there. Normally at this point now, I'm just like, all right, is the grass concrete? Perfect. That's the kind of house I want. And it doesn't stop the trash, but the frequent mowings. So, and obviously within reason of cost. The reason this one's still grass is because it would cost me like $7,000 to turn it all into concrete. But so this is something that you have to understand about the guaranteed voucher. And also, Simi, let's go into it. Like even for the landlord's portion in the re-inspections that you got to do every year. I just mentioned how my tenant can lose their voucher and it's now my problem. What about the landlord? Do you ever see it pass the first time around, or is that just like the first initial inspection? It always fails the first time.
So generally you will see fails a lot of times on the annual inspections. And that's largely because just wear and tear on the property. Yeah. There's going to be issues that you're going to have to fix. We always budget within our numbers at least $1,000 on the annual inspection. And that might sound a lot to some, people who might have other, investment properties that they have market tenants in. Yeah. That's almost a full turnover that you're doing every year. The reason it works though is because you're getting these houses at such a discounted rate compared to any other area of the city that you would be investing in. And your cash flow over the course of the year will still cover that $1,000, sometimes even a little bit more. But it's something to budget into your numbers. When you are thinking about doing a Section 8 house, you have to budget in $1,000 for the initial inspection to get them moved in. And then you have to budget that same $1,000 every year for their annual inspections. And if you don't complete their annual inspection within their time frame, they will withhold rent from you. You're not going to make they're going to stop paying you rent. And so you really have to get it done. That's honestly probably the biggest factor I see as to why people leave the Section 8 program as landlords, is because it costs them so much money on the the annual inspections, and a lot of them end up missing deadlines, and then rent gets withheld, and they're just like, I'm just not going to renew this tenant. And
this compounds if they have kids.
Correct.
Kids.
Yeah, no, correct. Heavily. And that's
what destroy the place.
They really will, and that goes for market and Section 8.
It's just the re-inspections apply to Section 8. Like with my market tenants, the kids take the cabinet doors off, and I'm like, all right, whatever.
Right, we'll worry about that on the turn.
Yeah.
yeah. And that is very valid. And that is why, honestly, you really see the predominant amounts of Section 8 houses are 3 bedrooms, because you're not going to have too many kids. It's very on my tenant placement business. I get so many tenants looking for 4 or 5 bedroom houses, and they're just not around. Part of that is houses are fairly small in Baltimore City, and it's tough to make 4 and 5 bedroom houses unless you have 3 stories above ground, which is not incredibly common. And part of that is also that sometimes people would rather make bigger rooms and just keep it a 3 bedroom, so they minimize the amount of kids in the house. They find that the money they lose on rent from a 3 bedroom to a 4 bedroom, they make back on the repairs that they don't have to make. Because, for instance, like you were saying, if their kid takes a crayon and draws all over the walls, well, guess what? You're repainting those walls on that annual inspection.
Can't blame the tenant, can't charge him, can't do anything.
Exactly. And those annual inspections are pretty much just as rigorous as their initial inspections. They really they want you to have a pristine house for these tenants. And that's, like you said, regardless of whose fault it is. Like, obviously, in theory, this sounds like a great idea, right? You're going to have an inspector go in every year, make sure the hot water is running, make sure the heat's working, make sure the fridge works, the microwave works, everything that's supposed to be there is there. But just be prepared that it goes far beyond that on their inspections. Even cosmetic things that will not play into the functionality of the house are taken into account, and you will have to fix them, or Section 8 will withhold rent from you.
There's even some weird situations where, like, I mean, I had one where they just made me repaint my porch. It wasn't for lead. It was just
Yeah,
the porch just simply, it was a lead free house. All right. So keep in
right.
mind saying this, and it's certified lead free. And they just saw the porch had some patches, I guess, from the like weather, like, I guess
Sure.
if rain hits certain portions of it. So they just wanted it all to look silky smooth. And I need to repaint
Yeah,
all of it just to make
yeah,
it a
yeah.
uniform color. And I was just like, even my tenant didn't care. Even she was
Eh,
just like, who cares about this? They're like, yeah, they're making me do it. So
mm,
go ahead, move all your stuff.
and there is no negotiating with them on their inspections.
Yeah.
You can negotiate the rent if you feel like your rental amount that you were offered. Um, Not to get too deep into this, but when you submit your RFTA, you request a rental amount, and then Section 8 after their inspection and rental analysis will give you a rent offer. If you feel that rent offer is not sufficient enough to what you're looking for, you can negotiate that. And if you bring them comps within their requirements, they'll generally move up on rent. They are fairly good about that, but there's no negotiating when it comes to inspections. What they tell you needs to be done, you just got to do it or you're going to lose rent.
Well, if anyone else wants, in the comment section below YouTube, or actually reach out to me in my email if you want any more information regarding Baltimore or any advice or guidance regarding the city. It's a tricky city to go through. Feel free to email me at my email below. It's in the description below. Devin Moreno, investing@gmail.com. And if you want to hire a tenant placement expert team, this is Simi Vanderhoof. Simi, what is your email? How can they reach you?
Yeah, it's my name, Simi. That's SIMMY at BaltimoreLeasingTeam.com. And we'll leave that in the description as well.
All right, perfect. Well, all right, well, you'll be seeing more of Simi on this show. We're going to go into a lot of other subjects in regards to just how we handle working in the city, and we'll go in more deep dives. But until then, we will see you all very soon.
Thank you, Devin.